Okay, welcome. Good morning, everybody. Parshas Teruma on this beautiful snow day. As I look out my window and I see snow pouring from the sky, scenes I never saw when I was a child in California. Okay, so Parshas Teruma, the parsha that deals with the building of the mishkan, and Parshas Teruma will also always fall out in Chodesh Adar. And so obviously, as we speak about this all the time, whenever there's a parsha that falls out in a certain period of the year, certainly next to a certain Yom Tov or whatever it may be, an auspicious time, there's always an intrinsic connection. So we know Adar is the time of Mishanichnas Adar Marbim B'Simcha. We spoke at great length last week about the Marbim B'Simcha and the tools we can utilize to be Marbim B'Simcha, Arbetachein, etc. There's no question Parshas Teruma also has an intrinsic connection to the month of Adar, to Simcha, to the joy of the Jewish people. The question is how and what is that connection? So again, Parshas Teruma deals with the this parsha is actually written out of order according to many opinions. The Parshas Teruma comes chronologically after the Chet HaEgel and Parshas Kisisa, and as a atonement for the Chet HaEgel, for the sin of the golden calf, the mishkan was commanded, and the mishkan, which is the mitzvahs of Parshas Teruma and Parshas Tetzava, are all of the minutia, the details of building this mishkan, this portable tabernacle, this portable little Beis Hamikdash, this home for Hashem, this dwelling place for Hashem. And this really fulfills the whole purpose of the entire creation. The entire purpose of all of creation is to make Hashem a dwelling place in this world, is for us to recognize and to realize that as Jews, we are responsible not only spiritually for ourselves, but we are ultimately responsible for each other, for our entire nation, and ultimately the entire world. And our job, our responsibility, our obligation is to refine this world, to make this world a better place, to make it a better place for the inhabitants of the world, to make it a better place for our brothers and sisters in the world, and ultimately to make this place through our work, through our Torah, through our mitzvahs, through our ethics, through our goodness, through our kindness, to make this world a holy place, a godly place where ultimately Hashem can dwell. And this was fulfilled to a certain extent by the building of the Mishkan, which created a dwelling place for Hashem's presence in this world. The Mishkan was filled with all kinds of details. There's details on how the Mishkan was built and how the vessels inside the Mishkan were built. And our parsha begins with Hashem instructing Moshe to instruct the Jewish people to donate all of the materials, because this was a communal building, a communal structure on behalf of all of the Jewish people. And so it required the contributions of all of the Jewish people. So Hashem tells Moshe, and this is the beginning of our parsha, to instruct the Jewish people to bring all of the materials that are needed to build this Mishkan. And then he gives Moshe Rabbeinu the commandments of what should be inside the Mishkan, what should be the form of the Mishkan, etc. But I want to talk about the very beginning of the parsha. I'm going to pull it up on my screen here. I'm going to share the screen so we can pull it up. Okay, here we go. If we look at Pasuk tests. Let's see if I could. I used to be able to have an annotator, but I don't know, it doesn't work as well now. Let's see if I. Okay, let's just look at Pasuk tests. Oops, let me pull it down a little bit. Hold on one second. Let me go back there. Hold on. Okay, Pasuk test together with Rashi. Look what it says. This is after Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu to command the Jewish people to bring all these materials. And then in Pasuk ches, va'asili mikdash v'shechanti b'socham. Make for me a mikdash, and I will dwell in them, which is a whole shiur in and of itself. It should say, I will dwell in it. I will dwell in them implies the mishkan today is in the hearts of every single Jew, because the mishkan wouldn't be eternal. As we know, the mishkan was only temporary. It wasn't eternal. There would be a point where the mishkan would be lost and ultimately would be replaced by the permanent temple, the Beis HaMikdash, the first Beis HaMikdash, the second Beis HaMikdash. And now that we're in exile, we don't have the mishkan, we don't have the Beis HaMikdash. So this is alluded to, V'shechanti b'socham, I will dwell in them. That today our mikdash is, today we make it in our hearts. Okay. But look at Pasuk Tes. Kekol asher ani mara eischa, Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, everything that I have shown you, es tavnis hamishkan v'es tavnis kol kelav, everything that I have shown you, the pattern, the visualization, the pattern of the entire mishkan, the estavnis kol kelav, and the pattern, the visualization of where the vessels would be and how they would look. I've shown you everything. V'chein tasu, this is what you should do. So Hashem gave Moshe Rabbeinu a sort of visual and instruction of how to build the Mishkan. What's fascinating is that the last words in this pasuk, v'chein tasu, so shall you do. Look what Rashi says. Just one word, the first word of Rashi. The Kain Tasu, look at Rashi down near the bottom of the screen, says Rashi, that first word, L'dairos. This commandment is not just a one-time commandment for right now. This commandment of how to build the Mishkan, of the pattern of the vessels, of how they would appear. The Kain Tasu L'dairos. This is a commandment for every generation, says Rashi. Very difficult Rashi to understand. What does Rashi mean, L'dairos? We know this isn't a commandment for every generation. We don't have the Mishkan today. We've gone for 2,000 years without even the Beis HaMikdash. And even the Beis HaMikdash, there were differences in the Beis HaMikdash from the Mishkan to the Beis HaMikdash. So why does Rashi say that the Mishkan was clearly temporary? This was their structure while they were traveling through the desert. This was the temporary abode, the temporary temple, the temporary Beis HaMikdash for Hashem's presence while they were traveling through the desert. When they were going to come into Eretz Yisrael, they were going to build a Beis HaMikdash, which was going to be different. There were some similarities, a lot of similarities, but it was obviously on a much bigger scale, the Beis HaMikdash. So why does Rashi say the Mishkan is L'dairos, is for generations? This is a command. L'dairos means it's an eternal commandment for every generation. But we know that it's not. The Mishkan was a temporary commandment. So what does Rashi mean, L'dairos? And in that one word, Rashi is implying something incredibly powerful and a major lesson for all of us. And this is what I like to do in this year. Take one Rashi like that, take a pasuk like that, and show this, the underlying theme, the underlying message that oftentimes just passes us by. So in order to explain what Rashi means here, I want to introduce another question. Also with this same pasuk. Many years ago, I gave a shiur, and in the shiur, I quoted a medrash. And it's a medrash that's quoted in several places. It's quoted in the Chassam Sefer quotes it. It's in the beginning of Ein Yaakov, in the introduction of Ein Yaakov. And the medrash talks about the most important pasuk, the most important verse in the entire Torah. And there are different opinions. There's actually different versions of this medrash. But there's one version I want to speak about today. So the medrash, the Chassam Sofer quotes it as a medrash pliya, which means it's a wondrous medrash, meaning difficult to understand. And I think some of you may remember this. We quoted it and we gave a shiur on a completely different topic. We're going to quote it today and go in a different direction than we did in the past. But the medrash says as follows: what is the most important? If you could summarize, pick one verse in the entire Chamishi Chumshi Torah, pick one verse from Bereshis Bara Elokim until Le'enei Kol Yisrael, from the first verse to the last verse of the Torah. What one verse would you say encapsulates, personifies the entire message, the entirety of Torah? What one verse would you say is the foundation of all of Torah? By the way, I want to mention, I forgot to mention in the beginning, the sponsor of this year is sponsored anonymously in honor of all of our captives. They should be brought home quickly, and in honor of Eretz Yisrael and Achenu v'Achesenu be'Eretz Yisrael, that the war should end quickly with victory for Eretz Yisrael and for Klal Yisrael. Amen. Forgot to mention that in the beginning. Also, this year is in the schluss of a refuah shlema of Nava Bas Shoshana. Okay, sorry, I forgot, didn't take care of that in the beginning. So what? Let's go back to our measures. So what one pasuk? I mean, if I would ask you that question, what would you think? What one pasuk encapsulates the entire Torah? So the Medrash gives different opinions. The first opinion is Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. Certainly understandable, right? The unity of God. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. The Lord is our God. The Lord is one. This is the unity of Hashem. That certainly makes sense. Another opinion given in the Medrash is the Ahafta l'reyacha kamecha. Rabbi Akiva is that called Gadol B'Torah. Rabbi Akiva himself says that. This is the foundation of all of Torah. And then there's a third opinion. The third opinion is a pasuk in Parshas Pinchas, dealing with the Korban Tamid, the daily offering that was brought as a kevas echa b'beikev, as a kevas hasheni ben arbayim. That one lamb was brought in the morning, and one lamb was brought ben arbayim in the afternoon, in the late afternoon. So it's the pasuk about the Korban Tamid. So that's the third opinion. Now, the first two opinions I understand. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. I understand that's the foundation of all of Torah. The Ahafta l'reyacha kamecha, loving your fellow man as yourself. That makes sense also to say that that's the foundation of all of Torah. Es hakeves echa b'beikev, es hakeves hasheni ben arbayim, tasa b'beikev, es hakeves hasheni tasa ben arbayim. How does that make sense? The Korban Tamid? First of all, we don't even have the Korban Tamid today. That was only in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. So for 2,000 years, we haven't offered the Korban Tamid. And yet the third opinion is, as a keves tasa b'beikev, as a keves hasheni tasa ben arbayim. That's the most important pasuk in the entire Torah. That encapsulates the entirety of Torah. That's the Medrash. But what makes it even more difficult to understand is the Medrash concludes, Omid ben Azai al Raglo. Ben Azai stood up when this was being taught in the base Medrash. And Ben Azai was great Jewish scholar, Talmudic authority. Omid ben Azai al Raglo, says the Medrash, Ben Azai stands up to give an opinion from these three psukim. V'omar, and he says, Kain mistaber. It makes sense, that third verse, as a keves echad tasa b'beikev, as a keves hasheni tasa ben arbayim, that the Korban Tamid, the sheep that's brought in the morning, and then the sheep that's brought later in the afternoon, for the Korban Tamid, says Ben Azai, the Kain mistaber, that is logical, that is the most important foundational verse in the entirety of Torah. And Ben Azai brings a proof. Shahari Ne'emar. And what is my proof for this? Our pasuk in Parshas Teruma. He brings our pasuk. Kakala she'ani mara ischa. Everything that I show you, that pasuk that we just did, that Rashi said l'deris. Hashem tells Moshe Rabbeinu, everything that I showed you as tabnis a mishkan, as tabnis called Caleb, Kain tasu. Says Ben Azai, that pasuk is proof that as a keves echad b'beikev, as a keves hasheni tasa ben arbayim, is the most important pasuk in the entire thing. End of the Medrash. You can understand why the Psalm Sefer calls it a Medrash Pliya. It's a wondrous Medrash. How does that Medrash make sense? First of all, how is that pasuk the most foundational pasuk in the entire Torah? How is that more important than Shema Yisrael or V'yahafta? One sheep is brought in the morning, one sheep is brought in the afternoon. But even more of a question is, what does our pasuk have to do with that? As a keves echad tasa b'beikev, as a keves hasheni tasa ben arbayim, one sheep brought in the morning, one sheep brought in the afternoon. That's the most important, says Ben Azai. And what's the proof? All of the vessels and all of the mishkan that I show you, Kain tasu. This is how you should do it. That's the proof. What? It's a totally different topic. That's talking about the sheep that's brought in the Beis HaMikdash every day, and Moshe Rabbeinu is talking about the shape of the mishkan. It seemingly has nothing to do. So how do we understand all of this? So this shiur is based on a few different sources, primarily Sari Elafim, but also the Libub and other sources as well. So I'm going to, the Sari Elafim weaves a beautiful tapestry, and he brings us to an amazing conclusion. And let's see if I could do it, if I could do this justice and try to answer this question, and thereby giving us a real message of Parshas Teruma and the connection of Parshas Teruma to Chedesh Adar. So let's begin the explanation. So the explanation begins actually at a few Parshas from now. A few Parshas from now, in the opening of Parshas Kisisa, we have the mitzvah of Machzis HaShekel. And the Machzis HaShekel is a very straightforward, simple mitzvah. The Machzis HaShekel is basically that every single Jew, no matter how wealthy or no matter how impoverished, every single Jew, no matter where or who they are, has to give a half of shekel towards the construction and the maintenance of the mishkan, and ultimately the Beis Hamikdash. So that's it. That's the mitzvah. It's a community tax to support the mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash, the building and then the upkeep, the communal karbanas, the communal sacrifices, etc., all the things that need to be brought on behalf of a community. So this way, the entirety of the community has a chelik, has a portion in the karbanos, in the avodah, in the Beis Hamikdash, in the mishkan. So everybody has to give a half a shekel. It's a simple mitzvah. What's interesting is that that Rashi tells us, and the Torah Shebaal Peh tells us, the oral Torah tells us, there were certain mitzvahs that Moshe Rabbeinu had a difficult time comprehending. I mean, there were some, we know, not all of Torah is simple, and some of the mitzvahs and some of the mitzvahs and all of their details are incredibly complicated. For example, one of those mitzvahs that Moshe Rabbeinu had a hard time understanding and fathoming was the mitzvah of the construction of the menorah. The menorah was an incredibly detailed structure made out of gold. What made it so complicated and what Moshe Rabbeinu had a difficult time understanding was the commandment to build the menorah was that it had to be made out of a single block of gold. It couldn't be compiled and soldered and welded together. And Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't understand, how can I make it so fancy and with all of the details that you're telling me and carve it out of one block of gold? It seems to be impossible without soldering pieces together. And then Hashem showed him a demonstration of how to do it. But there's another example of a mitzvah that Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't fathom and couldn't understand, and that is the mitzvah of the Machzis HaShekel. And so the Torah tells us, if you look closely, it's fascinating because the Torah tells us, when the Torah gives this mitzvah of the Machzis HaShekel, it says, Zeh yitnu. This is an example of it. And so Rashi explains us that Hashem had to show Moshe Rabbeinu a matbeya shel eish, a coin of fire, because Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't understand the concept of the Machzis HaShekel. And so Zeh yitnu, the Torah says, Hashem showed him a coin of fire, and then Moshe understood. So now that itself is obviously, how do we understand it? First of all, why did Moshe have a difficult time understanding the concept of Machzis HaShekel? The donation of half a shekel is a simple, straightforward mitzvah. Makes sense. It's understandable. This way, everybody has a portion in the Beis Hamikdash. What was so complicated that Moshe Rabbeinu couldn't understand it? And how was that answered by Hashem showing him the coin of fire, the matbeya shel eish? Oh, now Moshe Rabbeinu understands. So the Chassam Sofer explains this in a beautiful way. He says, what's the underlying message of the half a shekel? You know, when we're giving to the Beis Hamikdash, it would make sense to give a whole shekel, right? So to give to the temple should be something whole. It's more chashuv. It's more important. It shows that it's a priority. Why give half a coin as opposed to a whole coin? Because in addition to supporting the communal needs of the Beis Hamikdash, there was another underlying sort of theme or underlying message of the mitzvah of half a shekel. And that is, and this is a foundation of understanding Judaism. You cannot understand Judaism and truly internalize Judaism without understanding that Judaism is meant not simply for ourselves, to elevate ourselves, and to refine ourselves and to rectify ourselves in our little portion of the world. But in fact, one of the absolute foundational ideas of Judaism is that we are all interconnected. All of us, the entire Jewish nation, I mean, ultimately all mankind, but specifically the entire Jewish nation does have a unique interconnection relationship we all have with each other. Kol Yisrael arevim zeh lezeh. We're all responsible for one another. It's not sufficient that I take care of myself. I am responsible to take care of the rest of the Jewish nation as well. Kol Yisrael, we're responsible for each other. So it's not, now, yes, I have to attach myself to Hashem, connect myself spiritually, refine myself, but I cannot stop there. I have an intrinsic responsibility to my fellow human beings, and certainly and specifically to my fellow Jews, to elevate them, to refine them, to rectify them, to help them spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, physically, whatever it may be. We're all interconnected. And so the half a shekel was a message to all of us that ultimately on our own, we are never whole. We are not complete. No matter how much of Veda I do, no matter how much I learn, no matter how much I daven, on my own, I can never be complete. What completes me? When I connect my half, to another Jew, to another human being. It's only then, when I connect to my fellow human beings, it's only then that I achieve wholeness and completeness. And so this is why we gave a half a coin and not a whole coin. Because in addition to the communal upkeep of the Beis Hamikdash, there was a spiritual message here, that we're all interconnected. And that my wholeness only comes when I connect to my fellow Jew. And here is what Moshe Rabbeinu had a difficult time understanding. How is that possible? How is it possible to connect to my fellow Jew, to every other Jew? How is that possible? I can connect to some, but it's impossible that I should like everybody or feel that connection to everybody. And certainly that everybody should feel that connection to me. There are some people who like me and some people who don't. Some people who feel a connection to me and some people who don't. And that's just the nature of human beings. So how is it possible that I should be able to connect to every other Jew, the how many millions upon millions of Jews there are in the world? I should connect to everyone? How is that possible? That's what Moshe Rabbeinu didn't understand about the Machzah shekel. He understood the giving of the shekel. That wasn't the issue. The issue was the underlying message, the connection. So Hashem shows him a coin of fire. And the message is, you don't have to connect to every other Jew. You have to connect your shekel to Hashem's shekel, to Hashem's coin of fire. When you connect yourself, when you surrender your ego, what is the division? What divides us? It's our ego. When I don't connect to somebody, that's an ego thing. Oftentimes. So when I surrender my ego and I connect to Hashem, then Hashem empowers that connection to the rest of Klal Yisrael. So this was the coin of fire. This was the message, that my first step in connecting myself to Klal Yisrael is surrendering myself to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's what's known in Hebrew, we've spoken about this so many times, bittul, self-surrender, subduing the ego, connecting to Hashem's coin of fire. That's the message of the Machzah shekel. First, connect myself to Hashem, and then I'm empowered. Then, through my wholeness, my shleimus, when I connect myself to Hashem, Hashem will empower me to connect to others and have others connect to me. In other words, my connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu is very dependent upon, and vice versa as well, very dependent upon my connection to my fellow man. And similarly, my connection to my fellow man is very dependent upon, is absolutely, that's the message of the Machzah shekel, dependent upon my connection to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. I can't just have one. It doesn't work that. I can't say, well, I'm connecting myself to Hashem. I don't particularly like people, but I like Hashem. It doesn't work that way. We have to utilize that connection to Hashem to then empower myself to connect to others, and vice versa. As it says in Pirkei Avos, if you want to know what your report card is with Hashem, what's your report card? It's midterm season now. I just graded midterms for all my seminary students. So what's our report card? Well, Pirkei Avos tells us one of the ways to measure your report card is measure the way your fellow human beings think about you. Another way, if you're married, is to measure the quality of your marriage and the quality of your relationship, because the same ingredients are necessary. I said this to my shul on Shabbos, and we're speaking about something completely different, but it applies as well. The relationship in marriage, the relationship between Ish and Isha is a complicated relationship. The male-female dynamic, and we've spoken about this many times. It's a completely different psyche. It's a completely different way of communicating. It's a completely different mode of thought. How is this male-female dynamic supposed to work and not just produce constant conflict? There's only one way that it will work without producing constant conflict, and that's through bittul, that's through surrendering, being able to see things through someone else's perspective. So whenever I teach this, I always get somebody that says to me, well, or whenever I'm counseling a couple, well, why should I be the one to surrender? Why am I always the one surrendering to why am I giving up and people feel very I don't know, it's difficult sometimes, even to somebody you love, to constantly be the one surrendering, to constantly be the one giving in. But I explain, you're not giving in. When you surrender in marriage, there's three elements in the marriage. There's the male, the female, and Hashem that brings you both together, the force that's higher than both of you. You're surrendering to Hashem. You're not surrendering to the other person. You're surrendering your ratzon to Hashem. And then you're able to come together. So similarly here with our fellow human beings, when we surrender our ratzon to Hashem, when we surrender our egos to Hashem, then we're able to come together. That's the story of the Machzas HaShekel. First, I connect to Hashem, and then I'm able to do surrender, and then I'm able to influence others positively and connect to others in a positive manner. That's the story of the Machzas HaShekel. But this also is alluded to in the setup of the Mishkan. This theme, this idea, this concept of connecting first to Hashem and then utilizing that connection to influence others positively is alluded to in the Mishkan itself, in the form, in the pattern of the Mishkan. If you look inside the Mishkan, you had in the holiest part of the Mishkan was the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And what was in the Kodesh HaKadoshim? The Aron Kodesh, right? The holy Aron, where the luches, this is where the luches were. The tablets, the 10 Commandments. And the Aron Kodesh, the holy ark, where the luches were, that represents Torah. And it's private. There's a curtain there. Nobody goes in. Only the Kohen Gadol, only once a year. It's a very private place, the Kodesh HaKadoshim, very intense holy place. That represents, the Aron Kodesh represents my personal private connection to a Kadosh Baruch Hu. My ultimate surrender and connection to Hashem, that's the Aron Kodesh. And then you have the next section, after the curtain, that's called the Heichel, the Kodesh section. And there you have the menorah that also represents Torah. Kiner mitzvah Torah or, the Torah or, the light of the menorah represents Torah. But the difference between the menorah and the Aron is, the Aron represents my personal connection to Hashem. The menorah in the Heichel section, the Heichel opens up to the entire Mishkan or the entire Beis HaMikdash. The light of the menorah then emanates to the entire Mishkan or the entire Beis HaMikdash. The menorah represents the Torah that I share with others, the Torah that I elevate others with, the Torah that I illuminate the world with. So I have my private Torah, my private connection, my bond with Hashem. That's the Aron. That's in the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And then in the Kodesh section, in the Hegel section, I have the menorah, which represents the Torah that I share with the world, the light that shines to the world. And also in that Hegel section is the Mizbeach, which represents, that's the Karbanos, the altar, which represents Aveda, and the Shulchan, the bread, which represents Gemilas Chasadim. So you have the menorah, the Mizbeach, and the Shulchan, which is Torah, Aveda, and Gemilas Chasadim, Torah, Tefillah, and Chesed, all meant to be given to the world. But what is the foundation of it all? The Aron Kodesh, my surrender to Hashem, my bond, my connection to Hashem. But then I utilize that connection to the next stage of the Beis HaMikdash to share my Torah, to share my Aveda, to share my Gemilas Chasadim with the world. That's the pattern of the Beis HaMikdash. And so now when we understand that, We can understand, we go back to our question, we can understand what Rashi's telling us. When Rashi says the commandment of the Mishkan is meant to be l'doros, for generations, for eternally. And we said, we know the Mishkan's not eternal. So what does Rashi mean, l'doros? Rashi doesn't mean that we're going to build the Mizbeach eternally. We're going to build the menorah eternally. Or we're going to have the Mishkan. That's not what Rashi means. But what Rashi means is, take a look at that pasuk again. The pasuk is everything that I have shown you, the pattern of the Mishkan. As tavnis ha-Mishkan, as tavnis kol kela. The pattern of the Mishkan, the pattern of the vessels. Kain tasu, that you should do l'doros. Meaning the message of that pattern, that message should live with the Jewish people eternally. The message of the pattern was first the Aron Kodesh in the privacy of the Kodesh HaKadoshim, again, the message of the Machzah Shekel, my connecting my shekel to Hashem, my bond to Hashem, that's the Aron Kodesh. And then the Kodesh section, giving my chesed, giving my Aveda, giving my Torah to the world. The pattern of the Mishkan has to be l'doros, not the Mishkan. That's what Rashi's saying. And now we can understand. Let's go back to the Medrash Pliya that the Psalm Sefer quoted. This bizarre Medrash, that what's the most important pasuk in what encapsulates the entire Torah. So I want to tell you how the Rabbi Ephraim Twersky explains this Medrash now so beautifully. The Medrash says, what's the most important pasuk in the entire Torah? Remember, we had Shema Yisrael as number one. Because what does Shema Yisrael represent? Shema Yisrael represents my personal connection to Hashem. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem is mine, Hashem is our God, Hashem is mine, Hashem Echad, I have a personal connection, my bond with Hashem. My connecting my shekel to Hashem shekel, the Aron Kodesh, my surrender to Hashem. That's what Shema Yisrael represents, my full surrender to Hashem. And then the next pasuk is, that what was the next opinion? V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha. The two verses, they're not arguing the two Tanoim. They're not arguing at all. They're saying that they're both saying the same thing. Yes, it's true. They just have different opinions. The most important thing is my connection with Hashem, because that empowers me. Once I connect to Hashem, that empowers me to connect to everybody else, to elevate everybody else, to be a light onto the world, to be a light, to be an elevating a force in the world, to be a force of healing, of love, of light to the world. But it only begins when I connect to Hashem. So Shema Yisrael is the most important. But says the next opinion, what do you do with that Shema Yisrael? What do you do with that connection? You love your fellow Jew. You uplift your fellow man. They're both saying the same thing. It's the pattern of the Mishkan. Connect first to yourself, the Aron Kodesh, then bring that light to the world, the menorah. Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokecha. So they both agree. They both agree. They're both saying the exact same thing. You have to connect to Hashem and then utilize that connection to be mashpia, to influence, to bring goodness, to bring love, to bring light, to bring healing to others. They're both saying the same. It's just each one has what's more important, the connection to Hashem or the ultimate result of that. You can't have the result without the connection, but without the connection, you can't have the result. So they both give different ideas. They both have different opinions, but they're both ultimately saying the same thing. But then comes the third opinion. What does that have to do with anything? Says Ben Azai, that pasuk is encapsulating both previous ideas. When I connect myself to the Echad, to Hashem, when I connect myself to the Echad, then I can connect myself to the Sheni. That pasuk of the Korban Tamid is a remez, it's a hint, it's an allusion to both of these psukim together. I make my connection to Hashem b'baker in the morning first. The first thing I do is make my connection to the Echad. And then once I make my connection to the Echad, once I'm connected to Hashem, once I'm surrendered myself, then as a kevus hasheni, tasa ben arbaim. Then ben arbaim, the next step later in the afternoon, as a kevus hasheni, I can connect to the sheni. I can uplift the sheni. So the pasuk of the Korban Tamid is a remez, is an allusion to Shema Yisrael and V'ahavta l'reacha kamecha combined. Amazing from the Sari Alafim. It's not my kid, it's Sari Alafim. It's unbelievable. And now we can understand what pasuk does he bring as a proof? Our pasuk. Everything that I've shown you, the pasuk in Parshas Teruma, as Tadnas and Mishkan, as Tadnas called Caleb. What does that do? Now we understand what that has to do, because the pattern of the Mishkan and the pattern of the vessels was exactly this message. The Aaron represents the Shema Yisrael, my connection, my bond to Hashem. The Kalim, the menorah, and the shulchan and the mizbeah represent my influence on others. What an amazing tapestry. I wish I was smart enough to think of these shiurim myself, but I just learned them and share them with you. But what an amazing tapestry, and what a beautiful insight into this pasuk in Parshas Teruma. So here we have a pasuk in Parshas Teruma, a simple pasuk, where Moshe Rabbeinu says that everything that I've shown you, the pattern of the Mishkan and the pattern of the vessels, the V'chein tasu, and Rashi says the V'chein tasu l'deiros, you should do this for generations, and we don't understand what it means, but now we understand the pattern of the Mishkan and the pattern of the vessels. First, surrender yourself to Hashem, and then utilize that surrender to be mashpia, to influence others positively. That's the real message of the Mishkan. The real message of what is the Mishkan? The Mishkan is Hashem's dwelling place in this world. This is what this pasuk is telling us. How do we make Hashem a dwelling place in this world? By making the world a better place for his children. By surrendering myself to him and utilizing that surrender, utilizing my spiritual strength to make the world a better place for Hashem's children, by influencing Hashem's children. And that's how I make my Mishkan today. That's why the pasuk said right before this, make for me a Mishkan, and I will dwell in them. Not just in that Mishkan 2,000 years ago, but I will dwell in them, and every single Jew 2,000 years later, in the year Tafshin Pei Dalet, thousands of years after the Beis HaMikdash is no longer here, I'm still dwelling in them as long as they're following this pattern. That's how we make a home for Hashem. And this is the connection of Teruma to Chedesh Adar. Because Adar, the Sfas Emes quotes, the Sfas Emes was the second Ger Rebbe, and he quotes his grandfather, the Chedushi Harim, who was the first Ger Rebbe. And he says, where does the Chedushi Harim says, where does the word Adar, what does it come from? I think I mentioned this last year, but it's worth quoting every single year. The word Adar. He says the word Adar comes from the word Aleph Dar. Hashem, who's the Aleph, who's the one? Hashem, Alufay Shalayla. Dar is to dwell. Aleph Dar, I bring down the Aleph to dwell in the world. I make a dwelling place for the Aleph. I make a dwelling place for Hashem. That's Adar. And he says that in fact, the Chazal say in Parshas Teruma, the Chazal say, make for me Asuli kitun echad, make for me a small little room. Sha'adir etzlechem, that I will dwell amongst you. Adir, I will dwell. Uses that language. Adir, sha'adir etzlechem. It's a lashon of Chazal. The Chazal say this is a medrash in Parshas Teruma, in our parsha, that the entire Mishkan could be encapsulated by this concept of make for me a room, make for me a little kitun echad, a little small room. Sha'adir etzlechem, that I will dwell amongst you. It's a remez to Chedesh Adar. A Chedesh Adar. Chedesh Adar is making sure. How do we create a dwelling place for Hashem? How do we create a Chedesh Adar? The Mishkan. The Mishkan in every generation. But we don't have the Mishkan today. So today, but we have the pattern of the Mishkan. And Rashi tells us the pattern of the Mishkan. Tadnis of Mishkan. The Tadnis called Caleb. That is l'deiros. The message of the Mishkan. The message of making a dwelling place for Hashem is making the world better for his children. And this is the power that we have in this month. This is the power of Chedesh Adar. And how do we do that? We do it through surrender. And that's why Adar has sort of a dual meaning. On one hand, Adar is Aleph Dar, is making a dwelling place for Hashem. How do I make a dwelling place for Hashem? We've spoken about this many times. Surrendering my own ego. My ego pushes Hashem out, right? Someone once told me in this year, ego is easing God out. Acronym. But that's what ego does. As the Gemara Masechta Seita says, there's one place that Hashem can't dwell. Shein ani v'hu yachol l'adar b'makam echad. He and I can't dwell in the same place. That's with ego. Ego pushes Hashem's presence away. So Aleph Dar is my first step. The message of the Shema Yisrael, the message of the Aron HaKodesh. My first step is surrender. But on the other hand, the word Adir, same etymology. Adir is mighty, is strong, is powerful. We describe something as Adir as being very mighty. It's the opposite of bittul. It's the opposite of surrender. So I'll conclude with a beautiful Simcha Banim of Pershischa. So it says Simcha Banim of Pershischa that a Jew has to walk around all day with two notes, one in each pocket. On one hand, on one note has to say that an expression of I forgot the expression that he has. No, an expression of total bittul. On the other note should be Bishvili Nivra Ha'elam. Bishvili Nivra, the entire world was created for me. In other words, we have to have both surrender, but at the same time, that surrender can't make us, well, I'm so buttle, I'm so humble that I'm not capable of doing anything. Surrender doesn't mean, surrendering your ego doesn't mean losing who you are. It doesn't mean not understanding your strengths, your talents, your abilities. It means surrendering those strengths, talents, and abilities and utilizing them for Hashem's purposes. That's what surrender means. So this is what Simcha Bunim and Pershischa says. Surrender doesn't mean I'm a garnished, I'm nothing, I'm not capable, I'm not worthy. That's not what surrender means. That's not what bittul means. To the contrary, the more you surrender to Hashem, the more you utilize everything that Hashem gave you for Hashem's purposes. So on one hand, we have to surrender, but on the other hand, we have to have Bishvili Nivra Elam. The entire world was created for my contribution. So that's Adar. Adar is both. It's Adir, it's mighty. I have to believe that I have the capacity to change the world. But on the other hand, Aleph Dar, I have to have the bittul and the surrender. And Anochi Afar Ve'efer, thank you. Anochi Afar Ve'efer, that's on the other note. Thank you so much. Anochi Afar Ve'efer. I'm nothing. I'm but dirt and ashes. Avram Avinu's quote, Anochi Afar Ve'efer is in one pocket, Bishvili Nivra Elam, the other pocket. That's Adar, Aleph Dar, and Adir. Surrender, but recognize that we have the capacity to change the world. It's a beautiful word from I'll conclude on this. I know I've said that a few times. It's a beautiful word from the Alter Rebbe in Likutei Torah and Parshas Bamidbar. The Alter Rebbe asks, the famous word that Har Sinai was, the Torah was given on Har Sinai, and because Har Sinai was the lowest mountain. And the Torah necessitates, as we said the whole time, bittul, humility. Hence it was given on the lowest mountain. In fact, the Alter Rebbe asked the question, so give the Torah in a valley. Why give the Torah in a mountain at all? Mountains has a mountain is some level of elevation, even though it's a small mountain. If you don't want ego, if you want total surrender, give the Torah in a valley. So the Alter Rebbe explains, you don't give the Torah in a valley, because a Jew has to have some form of ego, but healthy ego, but recognition that you're not just a valley, you're not just a nothingness, that you have the power to change the world. Now that ego has to be diminished and it has to be challenged, but at the same time, we can't completely. Hashem gave us an ego for a reason. It just has to be channeled towards kedusha, which is oftentimes difficult to do. But that's why we have to have a mountain. We have to have a shtel. We have to have a sense of strength. We have to have a sense of purpose. We have to have a sense of accomplishment. We have to have a sense of our abilities. We have to have a sense of our strength. But we should be humble. That's the combination of Har Sinai. That's why, by the way, Adar is the same numerical value as Har, mountain. Adar is a remez to Har Sinai. So with this, we understand the real underlying message of Parshas Teruma. The real underlying message of Parshas Teruma is that the pattern, Tavnis HaMishkan, V'Tavnis Kal Kelev, Kain L'Deiros. Kain Tasu L'Deiros. We should continue this pattern. The Aron Kodesh, connecting myself to Hashem, the Menorah, the Mizbeach, and the Shulchan, utilizing that connection to bring goodness, to bring kindness, to bring love, to bring spirituality, to elevate the world, and to elevate our neighbors and our fellow Jews. Connecting myself to Hashem empowers me to connect myself to my fellow man. That's the mitzvah of the mishkan, and it is through elevating the world and elevating my fellow man that I make the mishkan for Hashem. This is incredibly empowered in the month of Adar, which is exactly this message, Aleph Dar, making a dwelling place for Hashem. So Amir Hashem, all of us will take the message of Parshas Teruma, reconnect and re-strengthen and reinvigorate our bond with Hashem. And through doing that, the Shema Yisrael, and through doing that, we'll reinvigorate and re-strengthen our bond to our fellow man, the V'yahavta Re'acha Kamecha, both of them encapsulated by the Esakev Echad Baker, connect to the Echad Baker as Esakev Sheni, and then I could connect to the Sheni Ben Arbayim. This is alluded to in the Tavnis HaMishkan, the Tavnis called Caleb, which is truly the message of the month of Adar. So Mirz Hashem, through us empowering ourselves and elevating our fellow man, make that dwelling place for Hashem, create Chedesh Adar to be the month of ultimate simcha. The simcha where that dwelling place for Hashem is finally created in a manner that we can see it, be'enei basar, b'teiva, nirav, and nigla, with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu, b'imheir v'yemenu, amen. Okay, let's we're going to say a kapitel Tillim together, which we always do every week, for the safety and security of our chayalim, the IDF, Achinu v'Achisenu in Eretz Yisrael, Jews all over the world, wherever they may be. Let's say together Tillim 121. Let's pull it up. And wherever you are, you can say it together with me. And then Amir Hashem, we should see the pu'ulas from the Tehillim. Take it from me, Admonish. Shir Lamaloi, Sesei Nai Hari Miyayin Yaboy Ezri, Ezri Mi Madinoi Eise Shemayim Biaretz, Ayitin Lamoit Raglecha Ayanim Shem Recha, Hin Eliyanim Vlayishan Shemer Yisrael, Adinoi Shem Recha Nitzilcha Ayad Yaminecha, Yema Mashemesh Leikacha V'Yareach B'Layla, Adinoi Yishmarcha Mikora, Yishmar Es Nafshecha, Adinoi Yishmar Tzeischa V'Yacha Mi'ata V'Yad Eilam. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. Amir Hashem, we'll see everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Next week, there's actually no shiur. I'm out of town next week. So Amir, and I'll put it on the WhatsApp. Amir Hashem, we'll see everybody in 2 weeks. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a wonderful week.
Thank you.
Safe snow day. Thank you, Ron. Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us. Thank you.